Maya Chen rushed through the hospital corridors, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floors as she checked her phone. Her grandmother's condition had stabilized, but the visit had taken longer than expected, and now she was running late for her night shift at the convenience store. The rain pounded against the hospital windows as Maya gathered her courage to face the storm outside. At 22, she had learned to navigate life's challenges with quiet determination, working 3 part-time jobs to support herself and help pay for her grandmother's medical expenses. Maya pulled her thin jacket tighter and stepped into the torrential downpour. The city streets were slick with rain, and the usual crowd of taxis had dwindled to almost nothing. She squinted through the rain, desperately searching for the cab she had called. Through the sheets of rain, Maya spotted a sleek black car idling near the hospital entrance. The license plate was partially obscured by the weather, but the car matched the description her taxi app had provided. Relief flooded through her as she ran toward the vehicle. Without hesitation, Maya yanked open the rear door and slid into the back seat, grateful to escape the cold rain. She was breathing heavily, her dark hair dripping water onto the leather seats as she fumbled for her seatbelt. "Thank goodness you waited," Maya said breathlessly. "I'm so sorry I'm late. Could you please take me to the convenience store on 5th Street? It was only when she looked up that Maya realized she had made a terrible mistake. The man sitting in the back seat beside her was definitely not a taxi driver. Chapter 2. The Encounter. Alexander Kim had been reviewing quarterly reports when the car door suddenly opened and a young woman tumbled into his private vehicle, soaking wet and speaking rapidly about convenience stores. For a moment, he was too stunned to react. At 34, Alexander was accustomed to having complete control over his environment. As the CEO of Kim Industries, one of the largest tech conglomerates in the country, he lived in a world of scheduled meetings and carefully managed interactions. No one simply climbed into his car uninvited. Alexander studied the young woman beside him with sharp eyes. She was clearly not a threat, just a girl who had made an honest mistake. Her clothes were modest and worn, her sneakers soaked through, and she carried herself with the hurried energy of someone who worked multiple jobs. Maya finally looked up and met Alexander's gaze, her eyes widening in horror as she realized her error. The man beside her was impeccably dressed in an expensive charcoal suit, his dark hair perfectly styled. His car was clearly not a taxi. The interior was premium leather and polished wood. "Oh my God," Maya whispered, her face flushing with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry. I thought this was my taxi. I'll get out right away." She fumbled for the door handle, but Alexander found himself speaking before she could escape. "Wait." Something about her genuine distress had caught his attention. In his world of calculated interactions and people who wanted something from him, her authentic reaction was refreshing. "It's raining heavily," Alexander observed, his voice calm. "Where did you need to go?" Maya hesitated, torn between mortification and the practical reality that she was soaked and still needed to get to work. "The convenience store on 5th Street, but I can call another taxi." Alexander glanced at his driver, then back at Maya. For reasons he couldn't explain, he made a decision that would change everything. "James, please take us to 5th Street. Chapter 3. The Ride. Maya sat rigidly in the corner of the back seat, trying to make herself small while attempting to stop dripping water onto the expensive leather interior. She had never been inside such a luxurious vehicle, and every surface seemed to gleam with wealth completely foreign to her world. Alexander observed her discomfort with growing curiosity. Most people who encountered him were either intimidated by his reputation or eager to impress him. This young woman seemed genuinely distressed about inconveniencing him, and her humility was oddly appealing. "I'm really sorry about your car," Maya said quietly, noticing the small puddle forming beneath her feet. "I'll pay for cleaning if there's any damage." "That won't be necessary," Alexander replied, his tone softer than usual. "Accidents happen." Maya glanced at him sideways, surprised by his kindness. She had expected anger from someone who was clearly important and wealthy. Instead, he seemed almost amused by the situation. "Are you a doctor?" Maya asked, trying to make conversation. "I saw you coming from the hospital." "No, I was visiting someone," Alexander answered, not elaborate. He had been checking on a business associate who had suffered a heart attack, but something about Maya's genuine interest made him want to share more. "I hope they're okay," Maya said with sincere concern. Hospitals can be scary places. Alexander found himself studying her profile as she looked out the rain-streaked window. There was something peaceful about her presence that made the usual tension in his shoulders begin to relax. "What about you?" Alexander asked. "Were you visiting someone?" Maya's expression grew sad. "My grandmother. She's been sick for a while, and I try to visit her every day after my first job and before my night shift." The simple honesty of her answer struck Alexander unexpectedly. Here was someone who worked multiple jobs and still made time to care for family, someone whose priorities were so different from the people in his usual circle. Chapter 4. The Revelation. As the car glided through the rain-soaked streets, Maya found herself relaxing despite the surreal nature of her situation. The stranger beside her had a calming presence, and his unexpected kindness had eased her initial panic. "What kind of work do you do?" Alexander asked, genuinely curious about this young woman who seemed to live in a completely different world from his own. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, embarrassed by the contrast between her circumstances and his obvious wealth. "I work at a coffee shop in the mornings, tutor high school students in the afternoons, and work the night shift at a convenience store. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bill." Alexander was quiet for a moment, processing the reality of someone working 3 jobs just to survive. In his world of corporate mergers and billion-dollar deals, he had lost touch with the daily struggles that most people faced. "That's a lot of responsibility," he said finally. "What are you studying?" "I'm not in school right now," Maya admitted. "I had to drop out of college when my parents died to take care of my grandmother and work, but I'm hoping to go back someday to study nursing." The car pulled up in front of a small convenience store with flickering neon signs. It was a stark contrast to the upscale neighborhoods where Alexander usually spent his time, and he found himself seeing the area through new eyes. Maya gathered her small purse and prepared to exit the car. "Thank you so much for the ride. I really appreciate your kindness, especially after I invaded your car like that." As she reached for the door handle, Alexander surprised himself by speaking. "What's your name?" "Maya Chen," she replied, turning back to face him with a small smile that lit up her entire face. "I'm Alexander Kim," he said, though he suspected the name meant nothing to her. Maya's expression remained unchanged, confirming that she had no idea who he was. In a world where his name opened doors and commanded respect, her lack of recognition was both refreshing and intriguing. "Thank you again, Alexander. I hope your friend at the hospital gets better soon." As Maya disappeared into the convenience store, Alexander found himself staring after her, something stirring in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Chapter 5. The Return. 3 days later, Alexander found himself doing something completely out of character. He asked his driver to take a detour past the convenience store where he had dropped off Maya. He told himself it was simple curiosity, but the truth was more complicated. The store looked different in daylight, smaller and more worn than he had noticed in the rain. Alexander could see Maya through the window, helping an elderly customer reach something from a high shelf, her face bright with the same genuine smile he remembered. Alexander surprised himself by getting out of the car and walking into the store. Maya looked up as the door chimed, and her eyes widened with recognition and pleasure. "Alexander, what a surprise," Maya said, her face lighting up with genuine happiness. "What brings you to this part of town?" "I had a meeting nearby," Alexander lied smoothly, though he wasn't sure why he felt the need to justify his presence. "How is your grandmother doing?" Maya's expression grew more serious. "She's stable, thank you for asking. The doctors say she's responding well to the new treatment, which is a relief." Alexander nodded, then found himself looking around the small store with new interest. The shelves were neatly organized despite the obviously limited budget, and Maya had clearly taken pride in making the space as welcoming as possible. "Can I get you anything?" Maya asked, gesturing toward the modest selection of snacks and drinks. Alexander realized he had no real reason to be there, but he found himself reluctant to leave. "Coffee if you have it." Maya poured him a cup from the machine behind the counter, and Alexander was surprised to find it was actually quite good. As he sipped the coffee, he watched Maya interact with other customers with the same genuine warmth she had shown him. Alexander realized he was witnessing something rare in his world. Authentic human connection without ulterior motive. Maya remembered regular customers' orders, helped children reach their favorite candy, and asked about people's families with sincere interest. Chapter 6. The Invitation. Over the following weeks, Alexander found himself returning to Maya's convenience store with increasing frequency. He told himself it was convenient for coffee, but the truth was that Maya's presence was a bright spot in his otherwise regimen. Maya seemed genuinely pleased by his visits, and their conversations gradually grew longer and more personal. She told him about her dreams of becoming a nurse, her memories of her parents, and her hopes for her grandmother's recovery. Alexander found himself sharing more about his own life than he had with anyone in years. "You seem different from other business people," Maya observed one afternoon as she restocked shelves while they talked. "You actually listen when people speak." Alexander was struck by her comment. In his world, conversations were often strategic exchanges, rather than genuine communication. Maya's observation made him realize how isolated he had become from authentic human connection. "Maya," Alexander said, making a decision that surprised even him, "would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow night?" Maya paused in her work, looking at him with surprise and uncertainty. "That's very kind of you, but I don't think we move in the same circles. I wouldn't know how to act in whatever fancy restaurant you probably go to." "What if we went somewhere you'd be comfortable?" Alexander asked. "You could choose the place." Maya considered this. clearly torn between interest and apprehension. "Why would you want to have dinner with someone like me? I'm sure you know much more interesting people." Alexander looked at her directly, his expression serious. "Maya, you're the most interesting person I've met in years. You're genuine, kind, and you see the world in a way that I had forgotten was possible." Maya felt her heart skip at the sincerity in his voice. She had been attracted to Alexander from their first meeting, but had assumed that someone like him would never be interested in someone from her world. "There's a small Korean restaurant near my apartment," Maya said finally. "The food is amazing, but it's nothing fancy." "That sounds perfect," Alexander replied, and meant it completely. Chapter 7. The Date. Maya changed clothes 3 times before settling on her best dress, a simple navy blue piece that she had bought for job interview. She felt nervous in a way she hadn't experienced since high school, uncertain about what to expect from an evening with someone who seemed to exist in a completely different universe. Alexander arrived at the small Korean restaurant in a casual button-down shirt and jeans, having deliberately chosen his most understated outfit. He wanted Maya to feel comfortable, and he was curious to experience her world without the barriers that his usual lifestyle created. The restaurant was tiny, with perhaps 10 tables and walls covered in family photos and Korean memorabilia. The elderly owner greeted Maya with obvious affection, speaking to her in rapid Korean before switching to English when she introduced Alexander. "Maya is like family here," the owner explained with a warm smile. "She helped my grandson with his English homework for 2 years, never accepting payment." Alexander watched Maya blush at the praise, and he found himself seeing her through yet another lens, as someone who gave freely of herself to help others, even when she had little to spare. They ordered several dishes to share, and Alexander was surprised by how much he enjoyed the simple, authentic food. More than that, he enjoyed watching Maya relax as the evening progressed, her natural warmth and humor emerging as she became more comfortable. "Tell me about your family," Maya said as they shared bulgogi and rice. "Do you have siblings?" Alexander's expression grew more guarded. "I have a younger sister, but we're not close. My parents died when I was in college, and I became focused on building the business. I'm afraid I wasn't very good at maintaining family relationships." Maya reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, a gesture of comfort that was so natural she didn't seem to realize she had done it. "I'm sorry for your loss. It must have been difficult to handle everything so young." The simple compassion in her voice touched something deep inside Alexander that he had thought was permanently closed off. Chapter 8. The Growing Connection. As weeks turned into months, Alexander and Maya's unlikely friendship deepened into something neither had expected. Alexander found himself rearranging his schedule to spend time with Maya between her jobs, and Maya discovered that beneath Alexander's successful exterior was a man who had sacrificed personal happiness for professional achievement. Alexander began helping Maya in small ways that she initially resisted, but eventually accepted. He quietly paid for her grandmother's medical bills, arranged for better healthcare, and created opportunities that would allow Maya to return to nursing school without financial stress. "You don't have to do these things for me," Maya protested, when she discovered the extent of his assistance. "I don't want you to think I'm with you because of your money." "Maya," Alexander said gently, "I'm not doing this to impress you or to create obligation. I'm doing it because I care about you, and I have the ability to help. Isn't that what people who care about each other do?" Maya realized that Alexander was learning about love and generosity through their relationship, just as she was learning about a world of possibilities she had never imagined. Their connection was teaching both of them about the kind of partnership that transcended social and economic differences. Alexander's friends and business associates were baffled by his relationship with Maya. They couldn't understand what he saw in a young woman who worked in a convenience store and had no connections to their world of wealth and influence. But Alexander had never been happier. Maya's presence in his life had awakened emotions and priorities he had thought were lost forever. She made him laugh, challenged his assumptions, and showed him that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. One evening, as they walked through a park near Maya's apartment, Alexander stopped and turned to face her. "Maya, I need to tell you something," he said, his voice unusually serious. "I'm falling in love with you." Maya felt her heart stop, then begin beating so fast she thought Alexander might hear it. "Alexander, You don't have to say any," Alexander interrupted gently. "I just needed you to know." But Maya stepped closer to him, reaching up to touch his face with gentle fingers. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have for weeks." Chapter 9. The Proposal. A year after their first meeting, Alexander had transformed from a lonely workaholic into a man who understood the value of love and partnership. Maya had returned to nursing school with Alexander's support and was excelling in her studies while maintaining their relationship. One evening, Alexander took Maya to the hospital where they had first met, though she didn't understand why until they reached the rooftop garden that overlooked the city. "This is where our story began," Alexander said, taking Maya's hands as they stood surrounded by flowers and twinkling lights. You climbed into my car by mistake, but I think the universe knew exactly what it was doing. Maya felt tears beginning to form as she realized what was happening. Alexander dropped to one knee, pulling out a ring that was beautiful but not ostentatious, perfectly suited to Maya's taste. Maya Chen, you've taught me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold. You've shown me what love really means, and you've made me a better man than I ever thought I could be, Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. Will you marry me? Maya was crying openly, overwhelmed by the love she saw in Alexander's eyes and the journey that had brought them to this moment. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, of course I'll marry you. As Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, Maya thought about the rainy night when she had made the mistake that changed her life. She had been running late, desperate to get to work, with no idea that climbing into the wrong car would lead her to the love of her life. I love you, Maya said as Alexander stood and pulled her into his arms. I love you too, Alexander replied. Thank you for getting into the wrong car. Maya laughed through her tears, knowing that it had been the most right-wrong decision she had ever made. Chapter 10. The Wedding. 6 months later, Maya and Alexander were married in a ceremony that perfectly reflected their journey together. Instead of a lavish affair at an exclusive venue, they chose to hold their wedding in the community center where Maya had tutored children, surrounded by the people who had supported them. Maya's grandmother, now healthy thanks to excellent medical care, walked her down the aisle. Alexander's sister, who had initially been skeptical of Maya, had become one of her closest friends after seeing how her brother had changed. The guest list included Maya's former co-workers from the convenience store, the elderly Korean restaurant owner who had watched their relationship bloom, Alexander's business associates who had come to respect Maya, and the many people whose lives both Maya and Alexander had touched. Maya wore a simple but elegant dress that Alexander had helped her choose, and Alexander wore a suit that Maya had picked out because she said it made him look approachable rather than intimidating. As they exchanged vows, both Maya and Alexander reflected on the journey that had brought them together. Alexander promised to never take Maya's love for granted and to continue learning from her example of kindness and generosity. Maya promised to support Alexander's dreams while pursuing her. The reception was held in the same community center, with food from the Korean restaurant where they'd had their first date, and music that reflected both their backgrounds. Alexander's business world and Maya's community had come together to celebrate a love that had transcended social boundaries. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Maya whispered to Alexander, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gotten into your car that night?" Alexander pulled her closer, his eyes full of love and certainty. "I think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be." Maya smiled, knowing that their love story would always begin with the night she made the most beautiful mistake of her life. Chapter 11. Ever after 2 years into their marriage, Maya and Alexander had created a life that neither could have imagined when they first met. Maya had graduated from nursing school at the top of her and was working in the pediatric ward of the city's best hospital, where her combination of medical skill and natural compassion made her beloved by patients and colleagues. Alexander had restructured his business priorities to focus on companies that made positive social impact, and he had established a foundation that provided scholarships for students from disadvantaged backgrounds. Maya served on the foundation's board, helping to identify recipients who reminded them both of the power of opportunity. They lived in a beautiful but not ostentatious home that reflected both their personalities, elegant but warm, successful but grounded. Maya's grandmother had moved into a guest house on their property, where she helped tend a garden that became Maya's favorite place to unwind. Alexander had learned to find joy in simple pleasures that Maya had introduced him to, cooking together on weekends, volunteering at the community center, taking long walks through neighborhoods he had never noticed before meeting. Maya had discovered her own strength and potential through Alexander's unwavering belief in her abilities. She had started a program at the hospital that provided support for families dealing with serious illnesses, drawing on her own experience of caring for her grandmother. One evening, as they sat in their garden watching the sunset, Maya rested her head on Alexander's shoulder and reflected on their journey. "Do you remember what you said to me on our first date?" Maya asked. "About how I had something you had lost along the way?" Alexander nodded, remembering the conversation at the Korean restaurant that felt like a lifetime ago. "I think we both found what we were missing," Maya continued. "You taught me to dream bigger than I thought possible, and I helped you remember what really matters." Alexander kissed the top of Maya's head, feeling the deep contentment that had become the foundation of his life. "We make a good team," he said. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, both Maya and Alexander knew that their love story was far from over. They had built something beautiful together, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and the kind of love that grows stronger with each passing day. Chapter 12. Full circle. 5 years after that rainy night when Maya had climbed into the wrong car, she and Alexander returned to the hospital where their story began. This time, they weren't there for a visit or an emergency. They were there for the opening of the Maya Chen Family Support Center, a facility that Alexander had funded and Maya had designed. The center provided resources for families dealing with medical crises, offering everything from financial assistance to emotional support to practical help with daily needs. It was Maya's dream made real, and Alexander's way of ensuring that other families wouldn't have to face the struggles that Maya had endured alone. As they stood together at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by hospital staff, community members, and the many people whose lives they had touched, Maya reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. "You know," Maya said to Alexander as they watched families exploring the new center, "I used to think that night when I got into your car was the biggest mistake of my life." Alexander smiled, remembering the soaking wet young woman who had tumbled into his world with such determined grace. "And now I know it was the best thing that ever happened to me," Maya replied. "Not just because I found you, but because it taught me that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the most unexpected places." Alexander took Maya's hand, their wedding rings catching the light as their fingers intertwined. "I love you, Mrs. Kim." "I love you too, Mr. Kim," Maya replied, using the formal address that had become their private joke. As they walked through the center that bore Maya's name, greeting families and staff members, both Maya and Alexander knew that their story was proof that love could transcend any boundary, that kindness could change everything, and that sometimes the wrong turn leads you exactly where you're meant to be. Their love story had begun with a mistake in the rain, but it had become a testament to the power of unexpected encounters and the magic that happens when two people are brave enough to love across the boundaries that society tries to create. Maya smiled as she remembered the frightened young woman who had climbed into the wrong car, and Alexander marveled at how much his life had changed since that night when a stranger had accidentally shown him what he had been missing. Together, they had discovered that the best love stories often begin with the most unexpected chapters, and that sometimes getting lost is the only way to find exactly where you belong.